This presentation will cover Weatherization Program Notice 15-4, which is the Weatherization Assistance Program's Quality Work Plan, and talk about how to integrate the components of the Quality Work Plan into the 2015 Weatherization Assistance Program Application Package. So a brief summary of the presentation today. We're going to give some background information on Weatherization Program Notice 15-4. Talk a little bit about why the guidance exists as it does and what the outcomes are expected from that guidance. And then we're going to talk about how to integrate the components of that guidance into your application package. And then after each section that we discuss, we'll talk about where you can find resources to go ahead and implement those in the most efficient way possible. WPN 15-4 consists of 4 primary sections. Number 1 is guidelines and standards. We talk about what it means to define work quality for the weatherization program and how to implement that definition of work quality into the day-to-day management of the program. Number 2 is communication. Talk about how to effectively get the information to the folks that need information related to work quality. Number 3 is inspection and monitoring. How do we inspect against those work quality standards, and how do we make sure the people that are doing that inspection work are qualified to do that for us? And then number 4, we talk about training. How are we going to make sure that when we're spending weatherization dollars on training, that we're receiving the highest quality training possible and that we're getting the expected outcomes from those training dollars? As we work through this presentation, the material that we're going to talk about tracks very closely to material that's available on this website here. You can see the link to the website down at the bottom of the page. This is the Energy.gov Weatherization Assistance Program Clearinghouse, and we've dedicated a section specifically to the Quality Work Plan itself. And so everything that we're going to talk about is also stated on this page. But this page has a lot of assets that go well beyond what we'll talk about on the presentation today. And everyone who is looking to create 15-4 into your 2015 application package really needs to go to this site and avail themselves of all the material and resources that are available on this site. So please do go there, and over the next couple slides I'll walk through sort of a summary of what those resources are. But it's very important that folks go and find those. First thing to note that's available on the Energy.gov clearinghouse for the Quality Work Plan is under each section you'll note that there are grantee Quality Work Plan checklists. And so as we go through this presentation today, I'll be pointing out various components of the Quality Work Plan that should be integrated into the application package, but on the website there's actually these checklists that allow you to print these out or use them on the web and actually go through and make sure that you've integrated each of these components into your application so you don't forget anything. You'll also note that under each section of this page on energy.gov there is a link to resources for meeting the requirement. And under that heading are a number of hyperlinks that will take you to various resources that will be very useful in implementing the sections of the Quality Work Plan that we'll discuss further in the presentation. Okay, so at this point we're going to back up a little bit and we're going to do a brief overview of the resources and tools that sort of underpin the Quality Work Plan. For those of you that have heard this piece of the presentation before, you can certainly skip ahead a few slides and get right into the meat of the presentation. It's the benefit of this particular format where we're just recording audio for each particular slide. But for folks that are new to the program or need a refresher, the next couple slides will just go over a few of the terms and a few of the resources that we'll be mentioning repeatedly throughout the program today. So probably worth listening to this if you're at all unfamiliar with some of the terms that you're seeing on this page. But in the big picture, what the quality work plan is based on are the resources that were developed over the past few years by the Weatherization Assistance Program to create some consistency in the way that we look at the work quality on a national level, as well as consistency in what we expect of individuals working in the program, and some consistency in the level of quality we expect in the training. So we call that defining the work, verifying the training, and certifying the worker. And there are 4 basic sort of resources under this project: the standard work specifications, which actually define work quality for the program, the accreditation of training programs, which really is a measure of quality of training, home energy professional certifications, which are a third-party assessment of individuals, professionals working in the program in various roles, and then the job task analysis for home energy professionals is really sort of the foundational document for the other workforce related resources. We'll discuss all of these in detail in the next couple slides. The standard work specifications for home energy upgrades really are the bottom of the pyramid of work quality that we've developed over the past few years under the Guidelines Project. They really lay out for every measure that we perform in the Weatherization Assistance Program and the home performance industry overall, what it means to achieve quality in a particular measure. So they break down the work that we do measure by measure, task by task, and they ask the question, what would a high quality outcome be for this measure? What are we trying to achieve here? And in the next slide, we'll look at what that actually looks like visually. So in this slide, we can see how an individual specification in the larger document is laid out. So this is talking about attic openings, and particularly pull-down stairs, and what you do when you are installing insulation in a pull-down stair assembly. So if you look at the far right-hand side of this table, the big picture here is the objective. It really says what are we trying to achieve when we're doing this particular task, when we're doing this sealing and insulating of a pull-down stair in an attic. Well, if you look at the objectives, you can see that they've laid it out pretty clearly. We're trying to achieve a uniform R value across the opening. So we want to make sure we are achieving at or close to the same insulating value across the opening that we have in the rest of the attic, so that we have consistent thermal boundary at the attic plane. We want to prevent loose insulation from entering the living area. It's nice that when folks open that attic stair, they don't have cellulose falling on their heads and into their hallway. And then we mention a code reference there, the IECC. We mentioned that so that folks have a place to look beyond the SWS if they want to get a little more information on what code says about doing this task. Moving to the left, we see once we've defined what that objective is, once we've said what we are trying to achieve is, then we actually lay out specifications that give you the minimum amount of achievement you have to have when doing that to get to that objective. To get to that objective of a uniform R value and to keep the insulation from falling on people's heads and to meet code requirements, well, here's what you need to do. The hatches need to be insulated with non-compressible insulation, and you have to have some sort of protective baffle or barrier. The pull-down assembly will be insulated to the same R value as the adjoining insulated assembly, and the roof opening needs to be surrounded with some sort of dam so the insulation doesn't fall on people's heads. Right? So, very clearly, what do we want to? How do we achieve it? And that's sort of the standard work specifications in a nutshell. And as I said before, we have these laid out for pretty much every task every common task that the Weatherization Assistance Program or any home performance program might do in the field. Obviously, we can't get to absolutely everything, but it captures most of them. To get to the full document or database of the standard work specifications, you need to go to sws.nrel.gov. That's where we house the database that has all the specifications in it. So we call the standard work specifications tool. You're just sort of seeing a screen capture of it here. But this is a very powerful tool because not only does it lay out all of the standard work specifications so that they can be read, but it also has the ability to create illustrated field guides based on those standard work specifications, as well as checklists and work orders, all tied directly to the standard work specifications so that you know when you've created those documents in the tool that they're going to match right up with the standard work specifications themselves. I'm not going to go too deep into how you actually do those various tasks in the tool because we have a whole other presentation on that you'll actually find a link to in the resources page on the energy.gov site that we mentioned earlier. Okay, so we talked about the standard work specifications. We talked about how they sort of form the base of the pyramid that we're building here related to work quality. And so if you think about going the next level up in achieving work quality in anything, well, first you define that work. You say, what is it we're trying to get to? What are we trying to achieve when we're out there working on a home? And from there, you can look at, well, if we know what we want to achieve, if we know the work we want to do and what level of quality we want to have in that work, the next logical step is, well, let's lay out what it would mean for an individual to have the right knowledge and skills to be able to do that work. And that actually has a name. It's called a job task analysis. It's a very formal process where you get a bunch of industry professionals together who do this kind of work, and you let them sit in a room and sit on a committee and actually write down all of the knowledge, skills, and abilities that a certain individual would need to have to be able to perform in a certain job. For the weatherization and home performance workforce, we currently have 4 formal job task analyses for both the single family and the multifamily housing types. In the single family, we have the retrofit installer technician, the crew leader, the energy auditor, and the quality control inspector. And for multifamily, we have building operator, energy auditor, project program manager, and quality control inspector. The job task analyses that we laid out in the past couple of slides form the foundation for the other workforce products to build off of. So we'll talk about in the next couple slides training program accreditation as well as worker certification, and those 2 products are made possible because of that job task analysis, and we'll see how in the next couple slides. As we proceed up this pyramid of work quality that we're talking about building here, we've talked about the very base of that pyramid being defining the work, and then we've talked about the next layer up being defining the workforce and what skills and knowledge a worker would need to have to do the work that we defined in the standard work specifications and those job task analyses that are those formal documents defining that work. And then as we move into the next logical step here, we're talking, well, what would it mean to adequately train someone to do all of the tasks and to have all of the knowledge and skills that are called for in the job task analysis? And the way we do that is we look at training programs that are training individuals in the industry, and we validate their quality and their ability to provide training with something called an accreditation. And accreditation is it's a third-party assessment of an organization's ability to do what they say they're going to do. In this case, we're talking about training programs, so it's an assessment of a training program's ability to provide training in a certain discipline, and you get an accreditation for whatever whatever job you're talking about or working in training too. So for each of those job task analyses that we talked about, the auditors and the crew leader and the inspector and the installer, each one of those has its own separate accreditation. So a training program would be accredited to train auditors or accredited to train installers. So it's important when talking about accredited training to know that you don't just get a blanket accreditation that says you're competent to train anyone in a certain industry. No, you're accredited to a particular job task analysis. So that's what you need to look for when you're looking to get training is, are they accredited to train quality control inspectors, or are they accredited to train auditors? This slide is a little bit of a closer look at what accreditation of training programs actually involves. It's important to know that accreditation can be offered by a number of organizations. Currently, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council is the only organization that is offering accreditation. So for practical purposes, when we're talking about how to work this into your 2015 application package, IREC accreditation is really the only game in town for now. But it's important to know that this is an open field and anyone could theoretically provide those accreditations. But what does an accreditation actually look at? Well, if you look here at this photo or this slide on the right-hand side, it sort of breaks down the primary things they're looking at when they're looking at training. You'll see circled there is a complete curriculum based on the JTA. That is the core of the accreditation. That job task analysis what sort of feeds everything else that the accrediting body looks at. So the first thing to look at is, okay, well, what is that job task analysis and what does it call for? There's a lot of skills that are called for in a industry like ours that's based on physical and actual on-site work. So you also have to have high quality facilities that enable you to train a sort of active environment. You have to have all the right props and tools. You have to have highly qualified instructors to train such a skilled job. And then you have to have policies and procedures that allow you to function as a high quality organization. Have to have things like anti-discrimination policies, have to have good methods for assessment, all that kind of stuff. So there's really a lot of work that goes into accrediting a trade organization, and that's why we feel it's a very good measure of high quality when folks are spending WAP dollars on training. So the last piece of the Guidelines for Home Energy Professionals project that we're going to talk about are the Home Energy Professional certifications. So while the accreditation of training programs looks at the organization that train individuals, the certification is actually a measure of an individual worker's ability to do their job. And we have certifications built out for the 4 single-family certification or job task analyses that we talked about earlier. And this is, again, sort of third-party, national, independent credential that individuals can apply for and receive to validate that they have the skills to perform their job. I covered most of this in the previous slide, but this is just sort of reiterating what I was stating about the certifications. They're all based on the job task analysis. They use the standard work specifications as a primary source document for building the certifications. Available for the 4 single-family job categories, and they're all built on, all of the products we talked about before. So this is meant to be sort of a cohesive, integrated system of resources and tools to help build out quality in the weatherization program in the home performance industry. And the certification is sort of the last piece of that, building up from what we expect of the work, building to what we expect of the worker who does the work, building up to how do we train that worker to do that work. And now this last step is you've gone through all that, you've actually trained the worker, and now let's put the worker through an assessment to make sure that they've actually taken on the skills and retained the skills and knowledge that they need to make use of all these other things, to install this work in the way that we expect it to be installed. I thought I'd just say a quick word here about the difference between accreditation and certification. These are two terms that are sort of similar, and folks tend to mix them up and blend them together, but it's important to keep them distinct and separate when we're talking about how to integrate them into the weatherization program. Accreditation is awarded to organizations, so this is a validation of an organization's ability to provide training in a certain discipline. As we talked about before, for our program for weatherization, they're currently that accreditation is administered by the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. Certification, on the other hand, is awarded to individuals. A certification is a validation that a person, that an individual, that a worker has the skills and abilities to perform a certain job. So it lets you know that an auditor knows everything that he or she needs to know to be able to effectively audit a home. And for us right now, those certifications are being administered by the Building Performance Institute. Again, just like accreditation, this could be done by other organizations, but currently we only have one in the mix. And for the 2015 application, the Building Performance Institute is the organization that is administering those certifications for us. So, difference between accreditation and certification, good to keep in mind. So let's dive right into Weatherization Program Notice 15-4, the Quality Work Plan. We'll start at the beginning with Section 1, and Section 1 talks about guidelines and standards. So the idea behind this section is we have now a national document that lays out what work quality should look like in the program, in the Weatherization Assistance Program, the standard work specifications. And so this section is really about ensuring that those standards for work quality get filtered down to the workforce on the ground who are actually in the homes doing the work. And so what the requirement says, all field guides and standards that are handed out and distributed by grantees to their sub-grantees and to their workers need to be aligned with the SWS. So anything that is in a field guide or field standard that is also in the standard work specifications needs to use the SWS as sort of the minimum, the baseline for work quality. Now you can vary from that if you have a particular measure or a particular task that your program performs differently than is how it is listed in the standard work specifications. You are more than welcome to come in for a variance request, and if you have a good reason for why you want to change it up a little bit, to change how that particular procedure is done or that particular measure is installed, we'll certainly look at variance requests and approve those if there is good justification for doing that. So that's sort of the big picture there. Field guides and field standards need to be aligned with the SWS, and any places where you don't want to align with the SWS, you need to submit a variance request. So you can see how we're going to structure this presentation from here on out. We're going to sort of summarize each section. We talked about at the very beginning there are 4 sections in the quality work plan, so we're going to go through those 4 sections, and for each one of those we're going to sort of summarize what the guidance says. I'm not gonna read the guidance. That's available online on WAPTech or on the energy.gov site. But I'll summarize the guidance for you, and then we'll talk about how do you take that piece of guidance, that section of guidance, and actually put it into the plan itself. And so that, that's what we're going to do on this slide, talk about how to integrate Section 1 into your 2015 Application Package. So in the guidance it says that SWS line field guides and standards need to be submitted to DOE for review. And so that needs to happen in advance of the start of the program year. So in the guidance it says 90 days. If you're not going to hit the 90-day mark, and right now as I'm recording this, we are past the 90-day mark for the April 1st starts. So what we need to hear from folks is where you are in the process. What are your thoughts about how you're going to get those field guides and standards aligned and out to the workforce by the beginning of the program year? So when you submit that document to us at DOE, to your project officer, and then it'll move up the chain to me, we'll approve it or not. If we don't approve it, we'll send it back to you. But assuming we approve it, you're going to get an approval form. And then those variance requests that we talked about earlier also have forms attached to them. There's a variance request form. You'll find it in the resources link on the energy.gov site that we referenced before. So for each variance you're going to come in for, you need to have a form filled out, and those will be signed and approved by me. And then you take all that stuff, all that signed copy of the field guide approval and the variance request forms, and you're going to attach them to your SF424 in your application package. And then the next thing you need to do to complete section in your when you're doing your application is talk about how you're going to distribute those field guides and standards to everyone who needs them. So we talk about you want to have those field guides and standards aligned with the SWS, but we also need a mechanism for getting them to the folks that need them. So just write a little narrative in your master file there in section 5.5.1, and just say, just doesn't have to be long, just state, we are going to distribute a link to an online guide that can be printed and distributed to all the subgrantees and contractors. We're going to actually ourselves physically print them out and mail them to our subgrantees and contractors. Just tell us what the mechanism is for getting that stuff to the folks that need it. Okay, so here are the resources on the energy.gov site for implementing Section 1 requirements. This is not necessarily stuff you need to have for filling out your application package, but these are the tools that you may need to use to get those field guides aligned and get all the things together that you need to have to successfully submit an application package with all the signed variance requests and signed field guide approval form. So going through these standard work specifications online tool, we talked about that a little bit earlier. We have some presentations there on how to align field guides and standards if you haven't started that process. Using the Unreal Field Guide tool, I'm not going to read these to you, but please go to the resources section. A lot of things there to help you getting your field guides together and getting them in a condition that can be approved by us, so that everyone has those things in the hands of the workers by the start of the program year. Okay, Section 2 of Weatherization Program Notice 15-4, Communication. So the intent of this section is to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what is expected going forward. The reason we put this one in is because historically there has been some back and forth between who said what and who expected what, often having contractors saying that they installed work in a way that they thought was complete and of high quality, and absent any sort of formal direction from either the subgrantee or the grantee regarding work quality, there's not much to say to that. It really would be a difference of opinion then. So we're trying to get rid of all of that gray area, and we're trying to say from here on out we now have a definition of work quality. We have a piece of guidance that outlines what we expect with regard to work quality and inspection and training, and we need to communicate that. So, the only remaining sort of piece of gray there is that someone could say, well, no one told me that we had expectations for work quality. So this section is about making sure that doesn't happen. So what this requirement says is that everyone needs to provide direction to that work quality guidance in any contracts or any contract language that goes out through the weatherization program. We need to have something referring to work quality, and we need to have that confirmed by the folks receiving that instruction. So integrating section 2 of program notice 15-4 into the application package is fairly straightforward. What we're looking for here is let us know what language you're using in your contracts to make your subgrantees and contractors aware of expectations for work quality. And also included in that some flow down requirements to make sure that subgrantees are then making their contractors and vendors aware of work quality expectations. And then we said we want to see confirmation of receipt, and that's really just as simple as a signature on that contract. Once someone signs that contract with that language in there, they're acknowledging they received those expectations for work quality. And that is about it. Weatherization Program Notice 15-4, Section 3, Inspection and Monitoring. The purpose of this section of the Quality Work Plan guidance is to make sure that homes are receiving a thorough inspection by an individual who is qualified to carry out that inspection. So to break that down, what it means is that anyone who's doing work quality inspections in WAP funded homes, whether it is on behalf of the subgrantee, the grantee, the contractor, whoever it is, needs to have a certification. They need to be certified as quality control inspectors. And when they perform that inspection needs to be done through the lens of the SWS. So they're inspecting work to be in accordance with what is laid out in the standard work specifications. So we're going to go through a few frequently asked questions, a few details that need to be elaborated on related to Section 3 of the Quality Work Plan. One of the big ones that comes up is related to grantee monitors and certification. And the question usually is, do monitors need to have the certification? And the response is that when we think about monitoring at the grantee level, we think about it as an activity rather than an individual. So monitoring usually has two parts. It has the financial grants management side of it, and then there's the work quality side of it. And so the answer to the question is that whoever is performing work quality inspections needs to be certified. Now that doesn't mean that the individual at the grantee agency who is in charge of the monitoring process needs to have that certification. So the grantee monitor as an individual doesn't necessarily need to be certified, but they need to be able to hire someone who is certified to do that work quality inspection for them. Perfectly okay for a grantee employee who manages the oversight of the program to not be a technical person and have that certification, but they do need to make sure that someone's certified as doing that work quality inspection when they're doing the monitoring on the requisite number of units required for that grantee. A second question we get related to grantee monitoring is inspection and diagnostics. Question is, well, do we need to go as deep on our inspection as someone at the subgrantee level would, as the quality control inspector does when they're doing the 100% inspections at the subgrantee level? And the answer is yes, for the percentage that you are doing as your requirement. So whether it's 5% or 10%, and we'll talk about which percentage you need to monitor in another slide. But regardless of which one you are, 5 or 10 or more, that percentage needs to have a full diagnostic inspection. Basically, you need to rerun the quality control inspection on those units. If you're doing additional inspections, if your 5% inspection reveals that you need to go deeper at a certain subgrantee agency and inspect more units, that's on you. Once you go beyond the DOE required percentage, you decide at what level you need to inspect. So if you've gone into a subgrantee and you have discovered some problems, and maybe they really appear to have an issue with their dense packing skills, and so you want to inspect 5-10 more homes just on the dense packing issue to see if that's consistent, that's okay. Go ahead and do that. As long as you're sort of overall 5% for your territory, when you're doing that sort of broad-based percentage inspection, you're doing all of the diagnostics. The purpose here is to make sure that every subgrantee agency is getting a really thorough look at their work and at their inspector's ability to assess that work. And to do that, you really do need to dig in and do the diagnostics and rerun the audit and really go back through and make sure that you're doing everything that the original inspector would have done and validating that process. But when you're sort of troubleshooting, when you're really digging in on a problem, then no, you don't need to go through the whole diagnostic rigmarole necessarily if you're not looking for something that is related to blower door numbers or combustion safety or something like that. You're certainly welcome when you're going above that 5 or 10% to carry out that process as you see fit. A few other points to mention on this section, some details that need to be noted. You do need to have policies for addressing non-performing inspectors. So the whole purpose of monitoring is to ensure that subgrantee agencies or contractors are able to carry out their work effectively or effectively spending federal dollars, and the inspectors that are working at those agencies or for those contractors are doing their jobs effectively. And so if they're not, there needs to be a written policy in place to deal with that. What's going to happen when it's discovered that an inspector is not performing their 100% quality control inspections at the appropriate level? Are we going to disallow those costs? Are you going to send them back to remedial training? What's going to happen there? There needs to be some policy in place for addressing when inspectors are not living up to their responsibilities. And then the second point here is that there is a little bit of nuance when you're talking about multifamily. We do not currently have a certification for multifamily quality control inspectors. However, we do have a job task analysis for multifamily quality control inspectors. And there are lots of training programs out there that will train specifically in the skills required to inspect multifamily buildings. So while we don't have a certification, you do need to have a plan in place to make sure if you're producing multifamily buildings that they're trained to do that. So we'll talk about training actually in this next section, section 4. Note here that training you do in somewhere how you're going to get your multifamily inspectors trained adequately. Integrating section 3 of Program Notice 15.4 into the application package. So this is really just going to be sort of a list of things we've discussed before, but breaking it down sort of piece by piece. What do we need written down by you in your application to ensure that you're going to meet the intent of this section? So how many inspectors do you need? And do you have them? We have a list nationally of how many certified inspectors there are state by state, and we sort of have a good idea of whether each individual grantee has enough inspectors to cover what they need to cover. But do you have that information? And if you do not have enough inspectors in place, what's the plan for getting them in place by the beginning of your program year 2015? What's your process for validating those credentials? How are you going to keep track of the fact, certifications for inspectors expire after 3 years. So it's not gonna, there needs to be a process in place for making sure that you're not just signing an inspector up on year 1 and come year 5 there's been no sort of revalidation that inspector's credentials are still valid. So this one's actually pretty easy. You just need to have a process for folks resubmitting their credentials every by the expiration date of their current certification. What are you going to do when the inevitable situation comes up and there's a shortage of QCI? Someone gets sick, someone quits. What's going to happen then? The guidance states that we need to have every unit submitted to DOE inspected by a certified individual. So what is the plan when you don't have a certified individual in a certain area at a certain age? Do you have a third-party inspector that you can call to pinch hit? Are you going to allow the inspector, the quality control inspector from a neighboring agency to come over and inspect those jobs? What's the plan there? So a number of ways to address that, but there needs to be some thought given to how that's going to happen. So what are your inspection policy and procedures? If you look at the guidance, it talks about a couple of ways that you can go about structuring this. The cleanest way is obviously to have completely third-party inspectors. A scenario in which the inspectors have had no contact with the work whatsoever. They didn't audit the building, they weren't working on the crew, they're just coming in cold and just doing an inspection of what happened. That's one way. The other way is for them to be combination auditor and inspector. So they're actually going back and inspecting the work that they called for on the work order. So they audited the building, they made the work order, and then they're going back and inspecting it. And that's a perfectly acceptable way to approach it. If you look in the guidance, we ask that if you're going to do it that way, that you increase the percentage of monitoring so that there are any issues with the actual auditing skills or process are caught. So we require 5% if you're using independent third-party QCIs. If you're going to use your QCIs also as your auditors, we want that bumped up to 10% because there needs to be some backstop in there. You can't get too far down the line with inspectors inspecting their own audits without making sure that the auditing skills are there, and there's some process for validating that the audits are being carried out effectively. And then we also need to see a multifamily inspector training. What are you going to do to make sure your multifamily inspectors are adequately trained? And all of this can be placed in the master file section 5.5.3 and or 5.8.3. This slide is largely restating some things that we've said in the past. This all needs to go in your master file section 5.5.3 and or 5.8.3. We talked about that percentage of units that need to be monitored based on where that QCI sits in the work. So we talked about that last slide. And then we need to hear who's going to do those work quality inspections during monitoring. We talked a couple slides ago about whether or not grantee monitors needed to be certified as QCIs. If yes, great. If no, fine. But who is going to do the work quality inspections during the monitoring process? If not, the grantee employee. And then, again, we need to see that written policy to address non-performance by a QCI. And that's about it in this one. Again, this slide is pointing out where in the energy.gov site you can find resources related to implementing the inspection and monitoring requirement. You'll note a big red arrow on this slide. It's there because it's important that folks who are sending individuals to sit for the certification exam for quality control inspector look at that document that arrow is pointing to. You'll actually find this particular resource, I believe, under the training section of the energy.gov site, but please take a look at it. It's a very good document that lays out some of the challenging aspects of that quality control inspection exam and how to approach them effectively taking that exam. Section 4 of Weatherization Program Notice 15-4 talks about training. The intent of this section is to ensure that any dollars spent by the Weatherization Assistance Program on training are spent on effective training and making sure that we're getting all of the skills and knowledge trained that we need to have in the program. So basically this requirement says that you need to break your training into two broad categories. Tier 1, which encompasses your regular comprehensive training that your workers need to go through, and then Tier 2, which is there sort of as a way to address things that may fall outside of that sort of regular comprehensive training. This can be anything from emergency trainings that are needed to something that is specific to an individual state or region, or other things. We'll talk a little bit more in detail in other slides about exactly how Tier 1 and Tier 2 differ. But suffice it to say that the big point of this is that we want grantee plans overall, training plans, to start trending towards providing workers with regular comprehensive training and to cover the majority of what they need to know. And not so much emphasis on sort of short-term emergency trainings that just happen by happenstance or because a problem was discovered in the field. We would rather see those trainings integrated into a more holistic, long-term strategy rather than being sort of counter-punching for problems. So now we're going to talk a little bit further about Tier 1 versus Tier 2 training and how to differentiate the two. Let's start with Tier 1 training. Tier 1 training is your comprehensive training. It is all the knowledge and skills you need to perform a certain job. It's occupation specific, so it is specific to an auditor or an inspector or a crew leader or an installer. And it's aligned with the job task analysis for each of those jobs. And it needs to be administered by an accredited training program. So we talked earlier about how we sort of built out this system for ensuring quality with the standard work specifications leading into the job task analyses, which then allow us to analyze training programs for their skills, right? So this is sort of the end point of that side of things, which is we want to make sure that all of our workers are receiving that good training based on that comprehensive job task analysis on a regular basis, and we'd rather that be the bulk of their training. So if I'm an energy auditor, I know that I need to go through, when I start on the job, I need to go through this 2-week accredited training program that covers the entire JTA, and I know that at some point in the future I'm going to get that training again so that my skills stay sharp. And that's the idea with Tier 1. Just like any other profession, you need to go through a full training when you start so that you know everything you need to know, and then you need to regularly go back and have that skill set refreshed. So Tier 2 training is there to address all of the things that fall outside of that regular comprehensive training. So these are usually single issue trainings, and they're addressing either things that fall outside of the job task analysis but are needed anyway. So OSHA 10 is a good example, not necessarily called out in the job task analysis itself but required. Lead safe weatherization, another example, or some special technology. I've got AeroSeal listed down here. If there's some technology that your program wants to use or does use on a regular basis that requires training, perfectly legitimate. That is a good use of training dollars, and that would fall under this Tier 2 definition. The other way that tier can be used is for emergencies, right? If you in your quality control inspection process find out that that a crew just isn't performing in a certain thing, their attic air sealing work is not up to par, and you just need to get them into training really quick so that the next few houses they perform are better than the last few, that's okay too. You need to sort of divert them for a couple days and them into training. That's a use of tier 2. We would hope that, relatively soon they'd be back up for another comprehensive training where they'd get that attic air sealing training as well in the context of their overall tier 1 training. But if it needs to happen now, it needs to happen now. We understand that, and that's what tier 2 is there to do. So here's just another slightly more clever way to think about tier 1 versus tier 2 training. This was not thought up by me, but by someone much smarter than me. If T and TA, what we usually use to stand for training and technical assistance, instead stood for teeth and toothaches. So tier 1 is your regular biannual tooth cleaning. It's just something you do. It keeps you in good shape. Keeps everything healthy and working as it should, right? That's tier 1, that's T for teeth. Tier 2 stands for toothache. So that's the emergency. That's when something goes wrong that you have to fix. You broke a tooth chomping down on a jawbreaker, and you got to just go in and get that tooth fixed right away. Has to happen. Nobody would blame you for spending money on that. Needs to happen, but maybe if you were getting your cleanings more regularly, your teeth wouldn't be weak and you wouldn't need that so often, right? Or doesn't necessarily have to be an emergency situation. Could be something that's just a little beyond the regular. Maybe you need some dentures. Maybe something happened on the job and you knock some teeth out and need dentures. That's also a legitimate use of that second category. So it's not necessarily just emergency training, but it could also be stuff that just sort of falls outside of that regular maintenance that you need to do. So there you go. Teeth and toothaches. Okay, so now that we have hopefully a better sense of tier 1 training and what it is, let's look at what it means to sort of integrate tier 1 training into your overall training plan, into your overall program. So what I've done here is I've taken the energy auditor job task analysis and I've broken it down a little bit. It breaks down much more granularly than this, but what I've done here is laid out sort of the hierarchy in the job task analysis. There are 4 primary domains in the energy auditor job task analysis, as you can see here. I actually expanded domain 3 so you could see the tasks that break out under that, and there's actually another level under this that I didn't even show here. So it's, a job task analysis ends up being a fairly lengthy document when it's all expanded out. But the reason I wanted to show this is to sort of let you see what a comprehensive training would look like. So if you were, if you have an energy auditor or a pool of energy auditors and you've decided that they need to go to training every year, and that comprehensive training needs to track the JTA, needs to be accredited through an accredited training program, this is what it would cover. It would cover all 4 of these domains. But you can see here that it's also possible to compartmentalize the tier 1 trainings. So in domain 3 here, you can see there are a number of tasks that all lend themselves to smaller trainings, right? So blower door testing obviously could be trained in a short-term module, right? And that's a 1 or 2 day class. Combustion safety testing, again, could be a smaller module. So I bring this up so that you can see that there are ways to get creative with this. So it doesn't have to be that energy auditors necessarily need to be out of the field for a week or a week and a half every year to get their regular training. This could be broken down and it could be spread out over, a number of months or even a number of years, as long as it was building towards a full comprehensive training and as long as you were working with an accredited training program to do this. So, every 6 months they could go back in for a couple of these modules and over time build up to a full training course. So options are there, and feel free to contact us or your local accredited training program to discuss ways to maybe go through it and do it this way. The next couple slides we're going to break down some misconceptions about Tier 1 training, and hopefully alleviate some stress related to it. So the guidance does not require comprehensive Tier 1 training every year. What it talks about is developing a plan for providing comprehensive training over time. But the time horizon can be whatever you as a grantee choose it to be. So if you want to create a training plan that spans 3 years, and you want to look at your workforce and say, well, auditors need to go through training once every 16 months, and crew leaders, they really need to be in training once every year because they're on the job every day and things, they just need to be in every year. And our QCIs, man, we really, those guys really need to be in there, every 6 months. That may be a little extreme, but you see what I'm saying? Like it leaves the ability for the grantee to decide what regular training actually means for them, because it's gonna be different. Every grantee is gonna be different. You have different skill sets. If you could have auditors that have been there for 20 years and they're ones flying around the country training other auditors around the country that they're that good. They probably don't need to be in training as often because they really are on it. But other grantees may have a pool of new auditors that probably need some more frequent check-ins to make sure they've really got things down. The guidance also does not prohibit state monitors from playing a role in training. It calls for accredited training, but that doesn't mean that monitors can't participate in that process. They can work with accredited training programs to deliver some content. They can do Tier 2 trainings. They can also be involved in developing training plans or doing some of the short-term trainings that need to happen. So Tier 1 training doesn't restrict anything in terms of overall training. It really is just a way to get people thinking about providing that regular comprehensive training over time. Tier 1 training doesn't, the guidance doesn't define who the weatherization staff are that you're going to train. This is your program. It is your decision to decide who gets training and who receives training dollars. So you may well decide that the only folks that you want to train in your program are your auditors and your inspectors, and the crew leaders and the installers. You just don't want to put training dollars towards them, and or maybe you mostly hire those folks out. Maybe those are contract labor, and you expect the contractors to be able to provide that training themselves. That's on you. This is your program. It's your job to define how you're going to allocate those dollars. Our guidance only says, there needs to be certain quality requirements when you are spending our dollars on training, but it does not tell you when to spend your dollars on training and who to spend them on. And this is important. The guidance doesn't require certification for any position other than quality control inspector. So, again, we go back to, I talked through the difference between accreditation and certification. It's often the case that when folks see that accredited training is required, they blend that with certification in their heads, but that's the case. Certification is actually sending folks to sit down and take an exam to get a credential. That's different than sending them to training. In fact, you don't even need to go to training at all to sit down and take a certification exam. So be careful not to mix those up. The only person required to be certified in the program right now for 2015 are the quality control inspectors. Training's a different thing. We do, who you decide to send to training is a whole different matter altogether. So just don't mix those up. And so hopefully that clears up a few common misconceptions about this guidance. Okay, so what are some options for providing Tier 1 training to workers? This is another area that folks often bring up um, as a hurdle. There are a number of ways to get Tier 1 training in your program. The most logical and straightforward way, not logical, but the most straightforward way that most people use is just sending workers to an accredited training program. So you have a training center that's in your state or a nearby state, and you pull your folks out of production for a number of days or weeks even, and they go off to training. And that's a very straightforward way to approach it. Another way to do it is to bring the training center to you. Say you do not have a training center that is within reasonable travel distance for your workers, then most of the accredited training programs have a traveling service. So they will actually come and bring their training program to you. They also, a lot of them do a blend of distance or online learning with in-person instruction. So if you can't afford to have them come and stay for a week at your site and train, a lot of them can do a good portion of the training online. So a lot of the sort of more book learning type of portions of the training happen online or through distance learning, and then they actually only send trainers to you when it's time to do the hands-on work. Again, we talked about possibly delivering a full JT over the course of months or even years to make, the idea that rather than pulling someone out of production for, a number of days at a time, you spread that out over a number of months or even over a year or two to them that full JTA over a longer time span. And then there's no reason that the Tier 1 training, that comprehensive training, has to be only restricted to the JTA. The JTA is just the minimum amount of content that needs to be in that training. You're certainly welcome to put any state-specific things in that training you want. You want to add your OSHA into that. You want to add your lead safe into that. That's fine. Tier 1 is just sort of the core. The JTA is the core of the material that needs to be in that training. But you can certainly go above and beyond. Let's talk about taking all of the things we've been talking about in the section 4 of the program notice 15.4 and actually getting them into a training plan that can then be placed in your application package. What do we need in a training plan? So here are the elements of a training plan. The first big category is what's the scope of your training plan. So what is the world and the time frame that your training plan is going to address? Talk about the time horizon. Is this a 1-year training plan? Is this a 3-year training plan? Identify your trainees. We talked about the fact that you don't need to necessarily train everyone in your program. You can pick and choose, certainly. Are you going to do all the field workers? What about contractors versus crews? Are you just going to train in-house crews, or are you also going to train the contractors? Which jobs are you going to train? Inspectors, auditors, crew leaders, installers, all of them? Only some of them? So do that. Identify, talk about how long is this training plan going to last? What time horizon are we talking about? And talk about, all right, who are we talking about? Who are we talking about training? And then figure out from there how frequently is each category of training going to receive that Tier 1 training. We've talked about this a couple times. Do those inspectors need to go back through training every year, every 3 years? We're going to do it continuously through those modularized JTAs. Talk about that. So that's your scope. The time horizon, who's being trained, and how frequently they're being trained. The second big element of a training plan is the implementation. We have the scope laid down. Who are we training? How long is that, the time horizon for that training? So now we're going to talk about how are we going to deliver that training. Who are you going to hire to do it? Which training centers have you contacted? Have you gotten prices? Are we talking about that full in-person training or that distance learning hybrid? Talk about that. And then once you've gotten that laid out, sort of the who and and when and that sort of thing. Now talk about Tier 2. How are you going to integrate Tier 2 to your overall sort of comprehensive approach? What's going to determine for you that a Tier 2 training is called for? Obviously things that are sort of outside of the comprehensive training plan conferences that you want to go to, those grantee specific things that you want to have folks trained in, manufacturer specific trainings, all that stuff can be worked in there. But just talk about how you're going to do that. Are you going to set aside a certain amount of dollars for that? Are you going to just sort of, lay down the comprehensive and fit in the Tier 2 as money allows? Just sort of narratively describe how you're going to think about working with comprehensive versus Tier 2 training. And then once you have that all pulled together, those training plans have to be placed in your master file section 5.8.4. And one more time, I'm going to point you back to the energy.gov site to find resources related to training. You'll see there are links to all the job task analyses. We have a link to all the accredited training centers around the country. And then we have a number of really good tools specific to the quality control inspector exam. So again, please go to the energy.gov site, pull down those resources, pull down those checklists, make good use of that site because it really is a nice roadmap to getting all these things pulled together for your application and for your use beyond the application. Okay. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this presentation. I think by following what we've been talking about over the past number of slides here, quite a few slides, and looking at that energy.gov site and making use of the resources there, everyone should have a pretty good roadmap to implementing the quality work plan into their application package in a way that'll get quick approval and hopefully provide a clear snapshot of how things are going to move forward in your program over the next year related to work quality. If you do have any questions following up to this presentation, please first feel free to contact your project officer. And you're free to also contact me as well. My email address and phone number are listed there on the slide. Again, appreciate your time, and I hope everyone has good luck putting their packages together, and I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.